Good morning, everyone. I just want to be mindful of VP Wong's time. We're so grateful that he was able to join us this morning. So I would like to kind of just get started and just welcome everyone for coming to this very interactive session, which promotes learning mindsets, metacognition, and fosters a sense of belonging. This workshop, I think, is really time sensitive as we faculty and our students begin to navigate that liminal space caused by COVID-19. I feel that liminality places a challenge on student success, and I believe that embedding practices to support students in this space is critical to their success. So again, I would like to thank VP Wong for joining us this morning and for welcoming us to the 2022 Joe Doctor Colloquium.
Thank you, Ruth. On behalf of the Office of Academic Affairs, first of all, I want to welcome all of you, and I also want to express a deep sense of gratitude and thanks to Ruth, to Jen, the entire Faculty Development Committee for putting together this fantastic interactive workshop, and for all the other work they've done during the course of the academic year. We all know that for the past 2 years, there's been quite a challenge for us and our students. Because of the pandemic, because of the academic downspin that we've experienced. Our students have been challenged, we've been challenged. The economy has really put us in a tailspin, and we've lost a number of students. And what's critical for us from both a practical, moral sense of obligation is what can we do, both as an institution, but also individually as faculty and staff and administrators, to really engage our students, to really help them be successful, as our strategic plan says, to really be mindful of who they are, what their needs are, and what they want and need to accomplish. So today's workshop, I think, really stresses that effort. The Joe Doctor Colloquium annually brings forth some of the most innovative ideas, workshops, presentations that hopefully make us better people, better faculty, more engaging for our students. In terms of past history, for those of you who may not know, because you might be younger in terms of BMCC age, Joe Doctor was formerly the chair of the now defunct Cooperative Education Department. He was very passionate about teaching and learning and about helping students. And he was actually appointed to be the Associate Dean of Curriculum and Instruction at BMCC in Academic Affairs. Unfortunately, he passed away because of cancer, but his commitment to both the college and the students in terms of engaging students, of them learning, it really made it very appropriate that the Colloquium would be named after him. And today's presentation, I think, is certainly going to underscore that goal. I hope that as you listen to Dr. Miguel Powers, that you will be engaged, you'll learn, hopefully you'll find some great ideas that you will be able to implement in the classroom and actually do what you do best, which is to help our students succeed. So again, I thank you all for coming, for participating, and I hope you're going to have a very productive session. Thank you very much, and best of luck.
Thank you so much for that, VP Wong. And just really quickly, I would like to take again this opportunity to thank Dr. Miguel Powers for sharing his research on learning mindsets. Just very quickly, Dr. Powers is a Fullerton College English professor who has been awarded both the Fullerton College Teacher of the Year and the Extended Opportunity Program Services Outstanding Teacher of the Year. So we have a colleague among us that's, again, very knowledgeable in growth mindsets and habits of mind strategy to improve student success. And we are so eager to hear and learn from him today. So Dr. Powers, it's all you now.
Well, thank you. And I was so impressed and grateful for the invitation and really thoughtful I was so impressed that you guys have this colloquium and have dedicated to a former colleague and someone who's dedicated themselves to serving students. So it's an honor to be here. I've been excited to work with the Bronx Community College for several years now and excited to share the materials with you. As mentioned, I'm a current teacher in addition to my role in promoting growth mindset, belonging, and purpose strategies. So I hope that you leave here today with very practical, useful things that you can implement into your experience with students, and hopefully some things that might be helpful for you in your other roles as well. So I hope that it's interactive. I want to start by having a little bit that started already, but one of the things that I learned in trying to foster a sense of belonging and community in the online space, I had never previously taught a class before COVID, like probably many of you, but I did all my online teaching synchronously, and I got a practice I really liked from one of my colleagues, which is I would like each of you to pick at least one person and welcome them by name in the chat. So if you could single out one person and just welcome them directly by name in the chat to try and help build that sense of learning community despite the disparate practices. So thank you very much, Quentin, for starting us off. Excellent. So with that, I thank you. And this is hopefully, again, going to be really interactive. The other thing I want to make clear is it's supposed to be for your benefit. So I want you to engage, ask questions. Certainly, I'm eager to have your questions, so don't think of it as interruption. So at this point, you should be able to see the PowerPoint. Is that correct? Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So have to admit, I haven't been on my computer little Zoom station for a while because I fortunately have been back in class now for 2 semesters. So with masks and all kinds of vaccine requirements, but this is a good opportunity to re-engage with this medium for me. So I just wanted to quickly go over our goals. So I want to learn what you want to learn. So if there's something you specifically have a question about, I invite you to include that in the chat and I'll try and keep track of that. I hope to give you engaged learning practices. We're going to start with this notion of neuroplasticity and then really work on these 3 academic or learning mindsets. Growth mindset, which is the understanding of neuroplasticity and the belief that you can change your intelligence, which hopefully leads to intelligent practice, so strategy-based solutions, because belief alone is not enough. A safe space where students feel welcomed and supported and recognize that challenge is part of the learning process and that they're going to be supported and supportive of others in a belonging community. And then ways to encourage students to develop a deep sense of purpose, because when we have a meaningful purpose, we're more motivated intrinsically and are better prepared to overcome obstacles and find solutions to the challenges that we each individually face. And then hopefully give some strategies that will lead us to help promote a sense of metacognition and develop a way that students can think about their thinking to improve their thinking. So those are my large goals for our practice today. If anyone has any questions, I'd be excited to hear them. So again, feel free to unmute yourself or use the chat. And again, I'll try and keep track of the chat, but I'm sure many of you are aware sometimes it's hard to keep track of all the different windows on your desktop at the same time. Does anyone have any questions or anything before we move on?
No.
Okay.
So I have a quick question.
Great.
Yes. So you mentioned intelligence. How do you define that?
So this is a thing that I actually try to avoid doing because it's a very difficult, controversial thing. So I think for the purposes of growth mindset, it's not necessary to get into the definitions of intelligence and the various competing definitions, because what we're promoting is the idea that based on neuroplasticity, and that when you learn new things, you develop new neural pathways. If you're struggling with something that you're challenged in doing, you are able to improve. And if you develop intelligent strategies, you can be more in control of the improvement that you make. So we could get into like the definitions of IQ and the various forms of intelligence, but I try to stay away from that because I'm certainly not an expert. I've read up about it and understand it's controversial and difficult, but we're basically rooting it in all the various forms, go through the concept of neuroplasticity, that you build new neural pathways when you learn new things. Is that a satisfactory answer for this purpose?
Yes, thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Yeah. that's an area that I don't feel competent to give you the definition, because when I read, I get more confused, I think, when I look at the experts' competing variations. Yes, I see hands, Hannah.
Yes, Dr. Faraz. There was a question in the chat. Are you going to get the recording of this and your slides later on?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I can answer that. Yes, the recording will be shared later on.
Okay,
And
fantastic.
we can follow up with Dr. Powers after.
Okay,
Thank you.
wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. So I practiced, and hopefully this is working, but I know if you weren't here, you didn't receive, but I think I put a file. So I'm going to resend it, because I know when you come in later, you didn't see it, but there should be a 1-page file. It should be appearing now, I think, in the chat. Are you able to see it and open it? Yes, excellent. And the reason I'm giving you that is I would like to begin with an activity that actually is one of my first day activities with my classes, whether we're in Zoom or in person. So I asked the students, looking at this image, I send them into breakout rooms. So Veronica's saying she doesn't see it. In the chat, you don't see a file box. Okay, some people are seeing it. So very good. Hopefully, at least when you get into there, someone in the room has it. And as long as one person has it, I think we'll be okay. And that person should be able to share, I think. But if not, the alternative is you can either grab your phone and get, or a screenshot of the image that you see. Okay, it's going to be shared by Ruth as well. So the image that you see, I'm going to ask you in your small breakout room to discuss. And I'm leaving it pretty open. I'd like you to consider the image as well as the phrase. So it's the same image that you're seeing on your screen now in the PowerPoint, but it's available because when you go to the breakout room, you won't have it. That's why I share the file. So when you get to the breakout room, of course, I'd like you to say good morning to the people you're with, and then discuss. What are your takeaways? What do you find interesting, thought-provoking about this image? And perhaps you, more than your students, might know a lot about students have to Maslow before they can bloom. But I find that my students have really interesting conversations about that. And some of them have knowledge of the theorists and some don't. But it leads to a space where we can have an opening conversation about the kind of classroom environment that we're going to try and create in our class. So I'm going to send you to breakout rooms. I kept the room small, so you're probably going to be with only 2 or 3 other people for this round. If you don't see the document, there's 2 easy solutions, and I appreciate people letting me know. You can take your phone out and grab a picture of the PowerPoint slide that you're looking at, or you could just do a screenshot on your computer, because that's all you need is the image on the picture of the tree on the side of the mountain and the phrase students have to Maslow before they can bloom. So even if you don't see this particular document, all you need is the picture on the screen and the phrase. So again, you should be able to, use your phone or some other device or screenshot, and then you'll have it when you go. I appreciate people reaching out and letting me know that their technology isn't working as well as I would like. And it looks like we're getting a screenshot being shared again. So hopefully that will work. Does anyone have any questions? The one other task is I would like to foster the conversation. So if when you're in your breakout room, you would pick one person to be the reporter who will type a few of those key takeaways, whether they're talking about the picture, the image, or just ideas or phrases that seem striking to your group, in the chat when we get back. And then we'll also open it up for verbal discussion. But this way we'll hear a lot really fast by having one reporter from each group type a few takeaways. In case you're less familiar, when you type it in your Zoom breakout room, it won't come back with you. So you have to retype it or save it and do it again. So just remember, you can type it when you get back, or you can save it and paste it later. So we just want to have one reporter per group. Does anyone have any questions before you go? All right. Thank you so much. So you should get the invitation now. Again, you're going to be with probably 2 or 3 people. So welcome back. There were some of you very patiently had to deal with technology and other things. So I'm grateful, of course, for your willingness to do that. Hopefully you had a chance to talk with a colleague and maybe have some interesting things. As we asked, maybe you have a person you picked as a reporter that could answer some of those things in the chat. So I'd love to hear from individuals as well for something that you observed or your colleague observed about the image or the phrase. And this is actually an activity I would do with students on the first day. So I'd be interested to hear what you thought about. Wow, Brenda is an excellent reporter. Thank you so much. There's a lot in that.
Yes, I want to say that I took the notes. I think my partner was almost, I tried verbatim to take some of these notes because they made a lot of sense to me. So I can't say it better than I kind of tried to copy down. That's what I'll say.
Well, it looks great. Yeah, it sounds like you guys were having a good conversation. So
Yeah, it was great.
Is it possible to report back orally or just?
Yeah, no, I would love to hear a couple people. So Vincent, if you'd be willing to do that, that'd be great.
Okay, there are only two of us, and then we sort of look at this very, very differently. For me, I saw three different pyramid shapes just by the image and also the word Maslow and Bloom. So I immediately go to the Maslow, the need pyramid, and then the Bloom taxonomy pyramid, and thinking about, as pedagogically speaking, how we're going to make sure that, in order for our student to be able to do the basic remembering, understanding, all the way to creating and analyzing, we need to find a way to scaffold and to really create a kind of structure, be able to guide them all the way to the top. Similarly, for Maslow, I assume that the basic needs of the students need to be met first before we can actually think about how to help them actualize themselves and to the top of the pyramid, and how we as an instructor, as a faculty, create a kind of environment for them to not only be able to do what they do academically, but also to make sure that those basic needs have been met. And then the third pyramid I saw was the almost the iceberg culture pyramid that we are seeing only on top of the iceberg, just like this tree that you see, and then without seeing all the deep-rooted assets and trials and tribulations that our students bring with them. And for me, it is sort of one of my top missions is to dig deep into those sort of beneath the surface, that kind of rooted challenges that our students are facing. My partner, Marianne, look at this in a very sort of organic picture in such a natural setting, especially almost from the trauma-informed pedagogy perspective. This is pleasing, this is soothing for people being displaced, and this feel anchored. And somehow this also gives you a sense of nature, so that we've been sort of stuck in, behind a screen and quarantined and isolated for so long. Visually, this is just such a therapeutic way to look at an image of feeling grounded, feeling anchored, and then peaceful. So those are the things that we discuss in our room.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing. I love that you gave a space for your partner as well. So you had two really different views, but both insightful and interesting. And I think that's a really good testament to your reporting out and the conversation you had. And I think, while it was probably a slightly different level than the conversations that my students have, I like that the multiple perspectives is really what's part of the conversation. So I think that was really excellent. Does one more person want to report out verbally? Thank you so much for that one.
I could, if you want.
Thank you, please.
So what's interesting is, maybe I missed it, but thank you so much for this image. It's very powerful. My question is, who are the students who see this image? Do they have any prior experience to Maslow's hierarchy, or is this the first image they see?
So I often do this on the first day of class. It's frequently the screen's background that I have. So instead of the one that I have now, I'll frequently use this as my background. So they'll have seen it from the day, like the first time I log into the Zoom class, if it was a Zoom class. So, but what's interesting is they're not new when they come to my class to Maslow necessarily. Like I have no knowledge of what my students know and don't know the day they walk into my class. So what I like to think about this is a framework that I learned from others, which is that this activity has a low floor. You don't have to know anything about Maslow or Bloom, but I find
Right.
that 20 or 30% of my students know Maslow. They've heard that, they know it before. And maybe 5% of my students know Bloom, but it doesn't matter if you know either of those, you can engage just with the picture. So it's a low floor. There's no assumed knowledge. You can just approach this image without any background knowledge necessary. It's got wide walls in that there's lots of spaces that people can go. As Vincent reported, the two of them had really different answers. One was very theoretical, invoking several and synthesizing several theories in a really thoughtful and interesting way. And then one was much more about focus on the natural imagery and the sense of trauma-informed pedagogy. And then a high ceiling, right? Like those are really advanced level conversations. So my students will segue into something like this. So it should be advancing the slide. And we'll actually start to introduce the concepts of Maslow, and I'll have students explain that one because they got that. There's students who are in there, they're like psychology majors and they're doing it. And then I'll introduce and review, if necessary, the concept of Bloom's taxonomy so that we can have a conversation and bring those together. And I begin the class by saying, I recognize things are challenging during COVID. I recognize this is something that's always been true, but it's more so now, and that you don't have to feel badly if you're struggling, because this is a time where everyone is struggling. We're in a situation of shared trauma that's unexperienced in the past by any of us. And it's ambiguous about how it's going to proceed and what's next. And there's no clear ending. And unlike all other traumas that people experience that I'm aware of, there are people outside of the trauma that you can go to for help, but there's nobody outside of this trauma. And so with all those situations, making that a visible place in the conversation and saying, this is a class that's going to recognize that and it's going to adapt to the needs of students before we focus on trying to help students learn, that's going to be an element of what our class is like. This is a safe classroom, which is going to recognize the challenge and actively seek to support you as a student. My college has made some dramatic shifts that started slightly before COVID, but now we have a much better sense of supporting the whole student. So I'll begin to share on that first day. We have a food bank that gives out hundreds of meals every week. We have help with housing security. We have mental health counseling. And we'll start talking about that right in the beginning of class so they can say, this community, our campus community, recognizes you as an individual before you as a student, right? You as a student isn't the beginning or end of you. It's a piece that we have to build towards before you're ready for it. So we can have that conversation. And eventually during the middle of my class, we're gonna actually use Bloom's taxonomy to do some self-assessment and work on an assignment that's really focused on this. So it's eventually content related. But for me, it's really about creating that sense of what our classroom is gonna be like. And so after my students share, the one that I usually end with, and we could continue the conversation, but I have lots of things I wanna get to, so I don't wanna spend more time on this particular one yet, is I talk about, if you imagined, you're still looking at the picture of the image now, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. If you imagine standing right on this cliff about where it says students, if you were standing right there and you walked up and this, you would see what looked to you like a stunted little bush, right? Kind of a shrub, right? A sad little thing. What you probably wouldn't see is if you looked over the edge of the cliff, which would be dangerous and you probably shouldn't do, but if you did, you would see this amazing tree that's probably hundreds of years old that found a way not just to survive, but to literally thrive in this completely hostile, completely unhospitable, almost a remarkable scenario that this could happen on the side of a cliff, that this tree could thrive for hundreds of years. And that's what many of us are like, that your students, as students, this is often how it looks. Someone sees you arrived a little bit late to class, or whatever they perceive, that you were getting there, but you wasn't as great, or maybe your performance doesn't appear to be as amazing as it truly is, because we often can't see all the things beneath. And I think Vincent was getting at that in his sharing out as well. And so we say that that's how we should see ourselves, and that's how we should see our classmates, and that's the community that we're in, that we all have these roots and these structures and these things that we're bringing, that is what this classroom is like, right? That we're going to have a safe space where people are going to be challenged, but also supported. So for me, I try to focus on that from the letter I send to students before the semester starts and elsewhere with my 3 core principles about caring, flexibility, and essential learning. I care about you as an individual. We're going to be completely flexible in this class because we recognize the challenge. And we're going to find that there's many ways to demonstrate the mastery that you develop. As long as we get to the essential learning elements of this class, there's many paths to get there. And so that's the principle I want to establish in my classroom from day one. And so the question I want us to think about is, if we want all our students to succeed and face challenges in meaningful and successful ways, what are we willing to change to help them, right? Because even before COVID, our students needed different things than what our systems were prepared to provide. So we as educators have to be called upon to make those changes. And that's the question. And so the image I chose here is actually one of our, we have student ambassadors. And these are our student ambassadors doing a panel workshop for our faculty about what, from the students' perspective, they needed and what worked when teachers did and what things were disincentivizing, what made them less likely to succeed. So I think one of the first things I advocate for is asking students what we can do better, right? So that's a thing that I have been working on my campus and elsewhere to change, is having student voice be more guiding and driving of the conversation. So these are my 3 core principles that I start from the first day. So I appreciate the engagement and the level of conversation. Again, I like that activity because it has a low ceiling. You can come in with knowledge or without knowledge. It's got wide walls because there's lots of places you can take it. And then it's got a high ceiling because, as we saw, people can get very theoretical. So a student who's an expert in Maslow, that first day, they get to talk about stuff they know, and they get to demonstrate this is a class where the information isn't solely coming from the instructor, it's coming from each other, and we're going to have this collaborative learning space. So we experienced some challenges with the first try of sharing a document. I'm going to go ahead and share the file again because it worked for some people, but I believe, Ruth, you emailed everyone this document in a few moments ago. Is that, you want to clarify that?
Yes, that is correct. I went ahead and sent everyone that PDF. So if you check your email, you should have that. And if you don't, just send me a message and I'll send it to you directly.
Yeah, because I'm using a second document now. This one's much longer and larger. You're happy to know we're not going to go through everything in it, but I gave you a bunch of things you might like later. Some of them are samples of what teachers who've been through our program have done in their own classroom, etc. So there's a lot in there. If it opens right in the chat for you, great. If it didn't, we tried to come up with a solution, right? We talked about flexibility. So we're already adapting in the middle of this session. So I appreciate Ruth's assistance. On that first page, you'll see information about Alan Brantley. And Alan is an interesting story. Alan was a student in my class, but how he got there was really interesting, and I didn't know all of it at first. But in the bottom corner of the slide, you'll see him giving a speech where he actually was asked they asked 5 students to recognize teachers who made a big difference in their lives. And Alan picked the teacher he had for English, the developmental English class, which is actually where he learned about growth mindset. And he began his speech by saying, "Gravity brought me back to school," which is a pretty good opening line of a speech. What he meant was he dropped out of high school and he was learning on his own. And he's a math science guy, and he got to gravity and he couldn't figure out gravity on his own. So he came back to community college to learn how to answer the questions of gravity. I would have gotten stuck way before gravity, but that's Alan. And so Alan had been at our school for 2 years at our community college, but he had not taken any English classes because he said, "I'm not a writer." So he found that he was ready to transfer and wanted to continue his exploration of things like gravity, but he couldn't transfer until he took English. So he took English, and he happened to be in a class that was part of our dissertation research where he learned about growth mindset. And it was really transformative for Alan. He went on to become a top student in that class, a top student in the next class. And then by complete chance, he happened to be in my summer school class. And about partway through the semester, he said, "Wait, you're the brain guy," which I tried to take that as a compliment. I think he meant it as a compliment. But so he found out that I'd been the one who'd been helping him, but he had learned it from this other teacher, and that's who he recognized as the person that changed his education. But what he said is, "I would like to make a video to help other students learn about growth mindset because it's so powerful and so transformative." So I'll share later the video. It's posted on YouTube, and you see some of the quotes, because what he learned was he had avoided the challenge of English because he wasn't good at it. But what he found was that the challenge is where the learning takes place. And when he reframed it that way, He went on to not only do well in my class, but he became our graduation speaker. He went on to get a Jack Kent Cook Scholarship, which they give 40 of in the whole country to community college students transferring. And then he was accepted to Stanford University, where he recently graduated from Stanford University. And he says it's largely because he learned about growth mindset and then became an advocate that helped promote it for thousands of people at my college and beyond. So I just think the power of this to transform people's response to challenge and help them adopt better help-seeking behaviors and new strategies is so important that we get this information to students and we think about how we can integrate it. Is everyone able to work? Yeah, exactly. He isn't a writer yet. I love that. That's something he would love that too. So is everyone able to have access to the handouts at this point? Is there any? Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Ruth, for helping us solve that. I appreciate it. So the second page is got information about 3 questions that you could think about how you're already doing this, because I'm confident you're all doing these things. But how do you make yourself more aware of them, and most importantly, make them visible to students? Because sometimes faculty and educators, we do things, but we don't make them visible to students of why and what we're doing. So making them more visible. And then what are new things you can try? So I just gave you that as a framework to engage in our conversation. I mentioned that we have a mindful growth initiative at Fullerton College. We want Fullerton College students to think of it as a growth campus where they're going to have high challenge and high support. So every student who comes to Fullerton College watches a growth mindset video in the orientation, and as many as possible get welcomed by a growth mindset mindfulness ambassador, as well as many other aspects. So we try to make it so that the first thing they learn about Fullerton College is it's going to be high challenge and high support for them to achieve high success. So we focus on that growth mindset piece so they believe they can change. But if you're going to take risks, you're going to fail in public, you're going to be wrong, you're going to take on those challenges of not yet. You need to have a safe space to do that. So we emphasize belonging. And we've done research at our campus that we're not doing that well enough, that there's disparate responses to how well people feel like they belong. So we're doing work on our campus to recognize that and continue to improve so that everyone feels like they're belonging. We focus on recursive learning and directed self-reflection. So that was a lot of me talking in a row there. And I would like to get back to you guys doing stuff. So I'm going to ask that you get a piece of paper or a pen or pencil and a piece of paper. Now I'm going to try to go back to the breakout rooms, but this time I need people to have a partner. So if it looks like when a breakout room doesn't have a partner, I'm going to kind of readjust. So hopefully you'll go back to the same person. Hopefully that's what happens. But this breakout room is a little bit different. And I'm going to ask that for just this next couple minutes, you're going to use your camera, hopefully. Or some of you actually have a picture on your screen that's yours. That would work as well. Because once you have a piece of paper and a pen or pencil, anyone having trouble obtaining those without warning? Okay, oh, I should explain what productive play is, by the way. So a lot of things in education become about like answering other people's questions, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But young kids learn by play. They try things out. They're willing to take risks. But again, we often learn we don't want to be wrong. I don't want to get the wrong answer. So we have this fear that inhibits our learning. So we want to return to this playful space where people can take risks and try things. And then what makes that kind of play productive is that we're reflective and think back about what we learned. So we're going to do a productive play activity. So it's really not that complicated or high stakes. It's just a chance to try things out. I'm assuming by now everyone has a pen or a pencil or pen and paper. Is that true? Anyone need more time? Okay. So in a moment, you're going to go to your breakout rooms. Hopefully you're either willing to turn on your camera, or those of you who already have a picture on your screen will be sufficient, because what I'm going to ask you to do is in approximately 90 seconds, you're going to sketch your partner. So that's why they need to see you, because they have to draw you. So you're going to sketch your partner. If you can't or are not wanting to turn on your camera, you just get the extra fun of verbally describing yourself for them to try and draw you from a verbal description if that's the best option. Because again, flexibility, right? We find ways to solve the challenge. So again, you're going to go to your breakout room. If you don't have a partner, I'm going to try and move you so that you do. And you're going to have approximately 90 seconds to sketch your partner. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. So good luck. Hello. I also went out to a breakout room, so I'm just returning as well. I know there was still some technology challenges. I don't have too many more breakout room things, so I appreciate your working with those. Now, first in the chat, I want you to think about and then share 1 or 2 word feeling you had when you found out what you were going to do, which was, how did you feel when you had to sketch or got to sketch your partner? What's your first initial feeling? 1 or 2 words in the chat. We started away right at the opposite extremes. I love it. Excited and dread, nervous. Yeah. Okay, great. Now, a fear. Okay. Challenge, inadequate. Wow. All right. Now here's the next piece. You can use my colored pencils. I love it. Okay. The next piece is those of you who have your cameras on or are willing to put it on, if you would hold your picture up and show everyone what you drew.
Miguel,
those
can
you have
you
your
stop your
cameras
share
on-
for a minute?
What's that?
Stop your share so that people can see.
Thank you. Good advice. Okay, let's see. Hold them up. Thank you for the advice. Oh, I'm seeing some great artwork. Some very clear headsets and vision. Oh, look at that. We got graphics. Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, excellent. Make sure you peek around and see what other people did as well.
Oh.
Okay, now, this was very good. I appreciate you guys playing, and we talked about it being productive as well. So we got this idea from a colleague of mine who got it from a TED Talk by the CEO of IDEO, the company IDEO, which is considered by many one of the most creative companies, and they actually give workshops and lessons on creativity. So he did this in a TED situation. So you're familiar with there's hundreds or maybe 1,000 people in the audience. So when he turned and said, you know, draw your partner, there was a little bit of like, oh, nervous laughter. But then he said, show your partner. What do you think what did it sound like when he said, show your partner to 1,000 adults who went to a TED Talk? You could actually hear the I'm sorries from the stage. Like so many people turned and said, I'm sorry. That was the thing you could literally hear from the stage. And that was his point, that as adults, we have internalized this idea that we're going to be judged, right? And so he does this with kids and they don't say, I'm sorry. They're excited. They're like, look at my thing. It's so great. And they're so excited. It's not because they're better artists, but we and our students have internalized this idea that we're going to be expected to be good and we're going to be judged. None of you told me you were a good artist. Some of you are amazing artists, but no one told me you were. So why would you come into this room and be expected to be good at something and yet we're still afraid of it? And that's often how our students arrive in your class. Like maybe it's a biology class and they never said they were good at biology, but on day one, they're going to get judged. They're going to be measured. They're going to be assessed. And it's scary. It's disincentivizing to always feel like you're supposed to be good, but you're not good yet, rather than having the space to get good. And so we try to put people in this situation with this activity in a low stakes way to sort of stay like, of course you don't necessarily know how to draw. We haven't learned anything about drawing. Some of you arrive with that skill, which can actually be more intimidating because the person sitting next to me is great at it. And I think they're an artist or they're just good. Not that they spent years practicing, learning and developing new strategies and techniques. They just do it and I don't. And so if we can make that visible to students, then we can really create a space where the struggle is necessary and essential and part of the learning and not a problem to be avoided. So again, thank you so much for that. So we can talk about this. And so these are some drawings from my friend Vicky who shared this. This is her son and her nephew, and they did the drawings. And you can look, right? Like when they drew, they said, LOL, fail, laugh, right? And hair, they had fun. So one of them was taking a drawing class and they had actually learned to use these perpendicular lines to create proportions. And I think that's a great lesson because when people are good at drawing, it's because they've learned things. And this is how people get good at things, is we learn new strategies. So the question becomes, as a teacher in our classrooms, an educator, what are we doing to help students develop new strategies and techniques? Making visible the steps that go into becoming someone who thinks like a chemist or writes like a writer or reads like a historian, so that we make visible the theoretical concepts, but also the steps and strategy and techniques, which are often really hard for experts to share because we've forgotten that we're even doing them. We've internalized those. So one way to talk about this is disciplinary blind spots. You as someone who's gone through an education system and become a specialist in a field, you can't go back. You think now like that discipline, right? If you're a sociologist, you see the world through the lens of sociology. And so how do you help apprentice other people into that field and make visible the kinds of intellectual moves and strategies, the perpendicular lines that you see without seeing them, to help make proportions? So if we can make the strategies visible and show that, then we're really empowering our students to improve over time and become better and create a safe space where they can learn and do the struggle that's necessary. So this seems like a fun little silly exercise, but I try to open lots of my classes, both in person and online, with what we do, productive play exercise. We create a safe space to be wrong, to reflect and learn together, and be a collaborative learning experience. So a quick little version, because I'm kind of behind schedule, actually a lot behind schedule. I learned about growth mindset because my son, I really tell it started with the Luma wallet. I don't know if you know what the Luma wallet is, but it's an amazing device. Well, really what happens is my son has a severe learning challenge and he had struggled in preschool. He got tested. They said, we don't know if he'll ever be able to learn to read. Biologically, we're not sure, but if he doesn't try, he won't learn. So I went to brain conferences as I first learned about growth mindset. I started using those growth mindset strategies with my son. And then one day at 5 a.m, my son came and stood over my bed when he was really little, and he yelled in my face, "Dad, Dad, Dad." And I thought the house was on fire and I was ready to jump up and, fight or flight. And he's like, "We need to buy the Illuma." And I'm like, "Jack, go back to bed." And he's like, "No, we need to buy the Illuma." And he told me all about, you can drive over with a Jeep, 20 credit cards, hold this whole bunch of stuff. But I'm not impressed because Jack's really good orally. But for the first time ever, Jack had written down a phone number on a piece of paper. Like, this was a huge thing because Jack could not really write without like a extreme adult intervention. So at 5:30 in the morning, we bought like 65 Illuma wallets, and everyone we know got one for Christmas. And this was like this huge moment that's really still even now an emotional time for us, because it was the first time where Jack he would say things like, "I have dyslexia. It's hard for me, but if I do these things." He actually has dyspraxia. It's a much broader spectrum challenge, but he eventually did learn how to train his brain to read. And now he is an avid financial person who loves finances, and he'll read and tell you all about taxes and all kinds of things. And so for that growth mindset process really transformed our family. So then when I went to graduate school, I did research on growth mindset. And when I started, I did the research review. They said there's no lit review. There's no research on community college. Well, they don't let you say that in graduate school, that no one's written about your topic before. So they sent me to the UCLA librarian. Then I got to leave with 3 hours later with a note that said there's no research on community colleges from UCLA librarian. So by the time I finished, there was, but when I started, they hadn't been studied. So we did work for several years, and we did a series of studies in the disciplines across the state of California with over 40 colleges from every discipline pretty much. And we found a series of practices that really can demonstrate changes in students' response to challenge. The first thing is you want to start with neuroplasticity. This has to do with the two different words, the brain and the mind. The brain and the mind. So think about it, the mind is different than the brain in what ways? What do you guys think of when I say the brain? What does that seem like to you?
A tangible physiological thing.
Excellent. It's the organ, right? It's the physical thing. Biology, love it. Great. Neurons, excellent. When I say the mind, what does that bring in?
Like logical.
Logical, right? So it's a little bit harder. Often it's funny when people answer the question, when I put them together, like, "Oh, the brain," and they rattle off a bunch of stuff, and they go the mind, and there's like a pause, like, And so one way to think about it is the brain is the biological, physical thing, and the mind is the things that brain performs, the functions perform. So some people have used the analogy of software and hardware, right? If that's a helpful way to think about it. So some people have a positive mindset, and you say, if you can do it, they're like, "Yes, I can." And other people are not so sure. And it's often contextual, right? I might say I'm not a music person, but I wouldn't take that approach to something that's a physical thing, like learning how to play golf. So it's when we help people understand neuroplasticity, that your brain physically changes when you learn new things, it empowers people to understand how their mind works. So mindset comes after understanding the brain's changes. So when we teach them in activities, really simple activities, we have a couple of them that show them their brain changes and learns new things. You build new neural pathways that the neurons that fire together wire together. That is empowering. So one quick way to tell them is a research study. They put some mice in one group that were isolated in a cage and had no toys or activities, and they just eat and sleep all day. And the other group were in a social environment, and they had toys and other mice to play with. And what happened is while they were tested, the mice that were isolated by themselves were slower at completing the cognitive tasks, like finding their way through the maze. So they showed that there was more, kind of going back to Brett's question, more intelligence. They developed their problem-solving skills in the mice that had a social challenging environment. But even more importantly, the mice in the social environment actually developed neural density. So when they weighed the brains of their mice in the two conditions after, they found that the mice who were in the social environment, their brains were 10% heavier. They built new neural pathways in those challenging situations and actually learned new information. So when students understand that their brains change when they learn new things, they're able to take on challenge because they know they don't know it yet, but everything they know now, they didn't know before. So a quick way to think about that is imagine like when you had to study your times tables, right? Probably at one point you remember putting a lot of time in and studying those times tables, and eventually you got a little better, and then you got to the point where you could do it automatically. That's called automaticity. So the neural pathway was strengthened over and over. That's very clever. I like that. Mice and impossible. So that neural pathway is strengthened to the point you develop neuroplasticity and then automaticity, which is how you can create retrievable memories and skills. So when students understand that, then they're ready to adopt a growth mindset. One of the images in your handout, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it because it's there, is a really great graphic that you can easily find yourself online, but it's about the two different mindsets and how someone with a growth mindset believes their intelligence is more like a muscle. And so when you challenge it, it grows, versus someone who has a fixed mindset and think their intelligence is like their height, right? I wanted to play in the NBA, spoiler alert, I did not. One of the reasons is I'm not tall enough. There are others, but one of them is I'm not that tall. I'm like 6'2". So I did a lot of things to get better at basketball when I was younger, but I never once went to the gym to get taller, because that's a non-responsive behavior. It doesn't make any sense. But if I think to myself, I'm not a writer, like Alan said, or other students, I'm not a math person, then it doesn't make sense to do work to get better at it, because I don't think it will change. If I think my intelligence is like my height, it doesn't make sense to work harder. But when I understand that with neuroplasticity, my intelligence is like my muscles, then I don't try and get stronger by picking up a really light thing. I try to get stronger by picking up heavier weights and getting a trainer who teaches me better strategies, or learn new things on YouTube, so that I get better by effort guided by expertise. And that is what we want our students to think about when they face challenge and struggle. So one last thing on this graphic. I was once presenting this to a group of about 100 student tutors, and a person from Carol Dweck's lab at Stanford had come to observe, and we've done some work with them. So she was listening, and she came up after and said, you have to tell people this isn't just a pretty graphic, that every one of those bullet points on the graphic has been verified by independent multiple studies. So when they say students have a different response to challenge or see effort differently, those have all been proven. This isn't just a pretty infographic. So I'm passing that on from Carol Dweck's lab at Stanford. So what does it look like for students? Because remember I said student voice is my big thing. So I had this student who was in my class, and the first day of class, she raised her hand. She felt very brave, and she raised her hand. She said a comment, and I complimented her on it, which I thought was just a normal, everyday thing to do. But she later shared how that was like really important to her, because as an English language learner, she didn't feel confident. And she went on to become my student embedded tutor and helped like 3 of the subsequent classes really succeed. And so she talks about it in a really interesting way. She said, witnessing myself thriving, I developed an anti-fragile identity of a learner and a strong belief in hard work. And so having my class, which we focused on growth mindset, changed her. And the transformative power of people that experiencing this is that she went on to become a tutor. And when at the end of the semester, I asked students to praise their classmates who helped them, 90% of the students specifically mentioned Hugh, even though that wasn't the question. She helped all these students succeed because she herself believed in it, and she was able to help students adopt it. So that transformative is community changing as well as individual. Any questions so far? Okay, so that was a lot of me talking again. So in your packet on page 4, there's a short testimonial about a faculty member who went through a very brief 2-hour workshop on this with some practical strategies. So if you would take a moment, I'm going to make bigger breakout rooms this time, but I'm going to ask you to read this section and look for golden lines. Golden lines is anything that stands out to you. So I'm asking you to read this statement from a faculty member and look for golden lines. So you can go ahead and start reading even while I'm getting the breakout rooms. It's on the screen, but it's also page 4 of your packet. You know what? In the interest of time, we're just going to read it here. So we'll just do the golden line section here because I see that I'm behind. So go ahead and read it either on the screen or through the packet and look for golden lines. All right. Does anybody want to share? Their ability form is not fixed. Thank you. Does anyone want to share verbally? I'll turn off the music so we can have some conversation. Anything that stands out for people you want to talk about verbally as well, or add on to the chat ones that were selected?
I can share.
Thank you.
Oh, go ahead. I thought someone else.
I was just trying to highlight that sentence, struggling is where learning happens. And in a different way, the way I tell my students is, also go back to this idea of brain is something that you can exercise or you can grow from, working it. So I do use the metaphor saying that this is unlike the muscles that you need to intentionally break the tissues. And then when they heal, they get stronger and bigger and you will become even more, your performance will improve. And instead of using the word struggling, I tend to use the phrase that discomfort. I want to make sure that the learning is not only when you struggle, but also when you feel uncomfortable, like the soreness after you work out. That is exactly when you are learning something new. If throughout the semester, nothing you learn make you uncomfortable, that means that you're doing the exact same thing you already know how to do, that you're not really learning anything new. So I'm just saying that using different, I think language is important to somehow change the way they think about the learning process. And when they're not using struggling or using the word discomfort and connect that to muscles or this idea of working out, exercising, I think it's a good way for them to get it done.
Thank you. Great. I appreciate that. I think Elizabeth, you were going to also share.
Yes, I always tell a joke to my students and I'll say, all right, you guys frustrated? And they'll all say, yeah. I go, good, I'm doing my job. And they're like, what? And I said, I was frustrated when I tried to get this lesson together. And I think someone said in the chat, I'm not sure who said it, but I'd like to give her or him or them credit. It's like, I think they really believe if they're frustrated that they're not smart. So the final thing I tell them is that, it is part of being smart, and part of being smart when you're learning something is being humble about your learning, because learning is a humbling experience.
Nice. Those are excellent points. And I agree. So I think it's really useful to share that, like Elizabeth, you mentioned that you shared that you were frustrated while you were doing it. And then, yeah, that was exactly the part I was about to point out, is this faculty member shared that they didn't know it before either, and that they struggle. I think making yourself visible that you too have struggled either in this thing or even more likely in other things. Often students project onto their teachers this identity that didn't struggle, that it was easy, that you're just there because you're good at it, right? So when you share and make visible your own struggle, you create that space for them to see struggle as part of the pathway towards success. So I frequently share challenges that I experienced and struggles I had in my education. And I think that's a really, it's the students tell us that's a very powerful thing, to have faculty willing to share their own challenges and struggle to make normal that part of the process. Many of you also picked up on the strategy for success that the faculty member put here about success equals effort plus good strategy plus help, which ties into what some of you guys were saying, that often especially students who have been identified as smart or gifted and all these things that we do to young people, they often are doing things that aren't that hard for them, so they're not challenged. And then they get to the part where they are challenged, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, I'm not really smart, and now I'm faking it. Because if you have to work, that means you're not smart. They don't see effort as a necessary part, they see it as failure. So when we can make visible the effort is absolutely there, but it's not enough, that is one of the most effective ways. Because if students believe they can change, then this question becomes how and what choices are you going to make? And that's empowering if students believe that they have choices and that they have ability to have influence. So just getting through my pretty reflection slide to this one. So when we have students believe that they can change, we want to have them not just do practice, but intelligent practice, because often students think practice makes perfect, but we want to start with eliminating that. There is no perfect. Humans don't do perfect. That's not an option, and it's not a good goal. We would hope for practice makes progress, that we can see progress and improvement as the goal, but then we recognize that if you just work harder, but you don't work smarter, that is not being intelligent. It's not making your best choices. So we want students to get this formula that you saw that the faculty member shared that he felt was influential in his students benefiting and getting better grades in his challenging exam. We want students to recognize effort plus good strategies plus help from others is the formula for success or intelligent practice. So we want them to work harder and not smarter. So the way we teach things, all of our sessions, we have a concept, an activity, and a reflection. A concept, an activity, and a reflection. So we introduce the concept of intelligent practice. One thing we ask them is, what's something you're good at? Just tell me something you're good at, anything. And they write about it for a little bit. And then we say, well, how did you get good at it? What did you do? And then we tell them about intelligent practice. So first we ask them something they're good at. Maybe it's cooking, maybe it's like learning to skateboard, or maybe it's drawing. And then we ask them how they got good. Then we teach them intelligent practice. And then we ask them to go back and see, well, where's the effort? Of course there's effort, but where did you get help from other people? Oh, my grandmother taught me. And so really everything they're good at is going to follow this pattern, because this is the pattern for human learning. They're going to get strategy from other people. And someone mentioned being smart means you don't have to try. The phrase that I get my students sick of hearing is being smart means being smart enough to ask for help. Because other people know how to do what you're trying to learn. So you should be smart enough to ask those people who know something you don't know yet, so you can learn it faster and easier. So what's the activity that we do along with this activity? So I'm going to do this one with you. So in just a second, I'm going to put up a screen that you're going to see that has numbers on it. So the way I'm going to talk about this, the way I would talk about it with students. So we're going to take a test. Often when we go to school, we take tests, and those tests find out who has certain skills and who doesn't have them. So this is going to be one of those situations. We're going to take this test to find out who has this skill. It's a crucial skill. It's super important. If you have this skill, it's going to help you not just in this class or even in college, but in today's technological society, it's going to help you in everything. If you don't have this skill, it's going to be harder for you to succeed. So we're going to take this test. It's really important. We're going to find out if you have this or don't have it. So it's super important, which is why I want to make sure the instructions are clear. So in a moment, I'm going to put the screen up. You're going to use your finger and you're going to find the numbers on the screen in ascending order. So 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, but no skipping. So if you found 6, but not 5, then you can't skip. You have to keep going. So again, I'm going to put a screen up that has numbers on it. You're going to find those numbers in ascending order. So 1, then 2, then 3, and just touch them with your finger, and no skipping. Does anyone have any questions about the instructions? Okay, you're going to have 30 seconds to find as many as you can of the numbers in ascending order. Ready, go. "15 seconds. 10 seconds. 5 seconds. Stop." So you didn't see this slide either about intelligent practice?
No,
Now I see it, but I didn't see it before.
No, that's on me. I thought you were watching it, but you weren't. So now you see it. Okay, so in the chat, share how many you got in that 30-second window. 12, 21, okay, 7, all right, 9, thank you. Appreciate everyone who's sharing. So it doesn't look like anybody got 30. I was hoping we'd get somebody who get 30 because that's great, Ron. So I want you to do well and I want to be a good teacher. So I'm going to let you try again. And before I let you try again, I'm going to offer you some really, really helpful advice, a great strategy. So it's going to help you a lot. But before I offer you that really clear strategy, I need to give you the new instructions. So I'm just going to look at Angela finished last. I see the last most recent comment. Angela had 13. So Angela will start at 14. You're just going to start wherever you left off and keep going. So the same exact thing wherever you left off. Does anyone have any questions about the instructions before I give you really helpful advice? Okay. Try harder. Go. Everybody's going now. Everybody's doing it. Yeah. Everyone start where you left off. 20 seconds. 15 seconds. 10 seconds. 5 seconds. Stop. All right, so now you're going to figure out if you did better or worse with my really helpful, excellent teaching, really great advice. You're going to subtract your first number from your second number. So if you had 13 and now you had 26, you'd subtract 13 from 26. So when you figure out, you're going to type in the chat if you did better, worse, or the same. Better, worse, or the same. Those are worse, better, same, worse, better, 7 more, worse. Okay, so now, I feel bad about myself because it's all about me. I'm the teacher, it's all about me. I feel bad about myself. A few people did better, but more people did worse. A few people got the same points for consistency. But before we go on and talk about this further, how did this experience make you feel? Let's get a couple emotional responses, a couple 1 or 2 word emotions. What did you feel in this? Challenged, dumb, sorry, not getting it, dizzy, interesting. Okay, so students often talk about similar things, frustrated, exactly, irritated, yeah. So what did I do, the way I set it up, that caused you to feel stressed, dumb, irritated? What did I do? Because they're all on purpose, because we want to talk about them with students. The counting, right? Like, shut up, I'm looking for numbers. We stop saying numbers, right? That was really annoying, right? Verbally pushed to do better, yes. Like, maybe you probably felt better about yourself till I said, did anybody get 30, right? When all of a sudden you had this super high expectation, maybe your number didn't make you feel as good. Maybe you saw someone who got a lot higher than you and that made you feel bad that you didn't. I implied that you weren't working hard enough, exactly. So this is the lesson we want students to get. Remember, the concept is intelligent practice, effort plus good strategies plus help from others, which hopefully you can see right now. I thought you could see it before, my bad. So we want students to take away the idea that if you don't know how to do something yet, you want to work smarter, not harder. Working harder is something that students share they've often been told. And if you're not working, you should work. But if you were working hard, doing more of what's not working well isn't being smart about how to approach the challenge. You should learn new strategies. So when we do this with students, we have a good conversation about that. We talk about the fact, and maybe when I said in the beginning, this is super important, right? Because that usually helps people when you make super high stress, but don't tell them why and don't give them any support or strategies. So we talk about all the ways that this test is set up to stress you out and make you feel less successful, and how as students, they can start to think about things differently. So this is part of the intentional conversation. But I'm going to try a third time. And this time I'm actually going to give you a strategy to work smarter, right, rather than harder. And I think you're right. I think our students as community college educators have a specific experience that they're bringing to this. I think that's a good point. So in this case, if we were in person, I would fold the paper into fours. So I'm going to show you, and then I'm going to show you how I'm going to do it online. So if you had a piece of paper like this, I'd have you fold it. I'd give you a new paper and you'd fold it in half. And it wouldn't matter if you folded it hamburger or hot dog, because you're going to fold it again. And so you'd fold it so it was like this. And then when you opened it back up, now there would be 4 quadrants. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then you'd be able to see that number 1 is in the first quadrant, number 2 is in the second quadrant, number 3 is in the third quadrant, number 4 is in the fourth quadrant, and that pattern repeats, right? So I'm going to show you really quickly, so I don't want to cheat and make it too easy. But what we're going to do here is you've got the quadrants on this screen. Number 1's in the first quadrant, 2 is in the second quadrant, 3 and 4, and that pattern repeats. So now that you've actually learned a strategy, and you're not just being asked to work harder, but you're being asked to work smarter with new strategy you didn't have that you got from other people, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to try again. So you're going to start at number 1. You're going to look in the first quadrant for it. Then you're going to move to number 2 and look in the second quadrant, and then 3 and 4 in their respective quadrants. And that pattern repeats. Does anyone have any questions about the new instructions or strategies? Okay, so you're going to start and have 30 seconds to find as many as you can. Go. And stop. So put in the chat if you did better or worse than your previous scores, or the same, right? Significantly better, right? Now put in the chat how that makes you feel. Cool, right? Yeah, how does that make you feel to do better? Excited, right? So this is the key. What if I'd started with this third round and we just started there? You wouldn't feel good about it because you didn't struggle first. Our brains actually love finding a challenge, learning new things, and overcoming it. That is intrinsically motivating. This is the concept of flow. When we can design a classroom where we give students a challenge that they can't do yet, motivate and support them to get new strategies, and then they can do it, your brain is flooded with positive neurochemicals. That's why you feel so good, because you struggled and then improved. That is self-intrinsically motivating at a chemical level. Your brain loves it. In fact, I don't know if you know anyone who plays video games, but video games are designed on this principle, the idea of flow. They're designed with the next 15 minutes. So some people, I've been told, play video games a lot. And I've been told that some of those people who play video games lose track of time. For example, they might be playing video games, I've been told, in the middle of the night, and their wife walks down the hall and says, I've been told, are you ever going to go to bed? And I was told that that person responded, I just started playing. And then their wife said something like, I've been told, it's 4 a.m. And that person, I've been told, said, what are you talking about? I had no idea that it was 4 a.m. because you're so immersed, I've been told, in the video game that you don't even notice that time has passed. That's actually one of the emblems of flow, is you lose track of time. So flow is the experience, is the ideal learning condition for humans when the challenge is ideally matched to your skills and resources. When something is too easy, you get bored and you want to quit. When something's too challenging, you get frustrated and you want to quit. You're intrinsically motivated, engaged, and willing to participate when the challenge, the bathroom break, yeah, true. The challenge is ideally matched to your skills and resources. So that's how we want to create the learning for our students. We want to create a classroom where they're going to experience the challenge, but they also know they're going to get help. They're going to get resources. They're going to learn new things. And in the game, they're going to go find that life pack, or they're going to pick up that aid, or they're going to combine with someone else, and then they're going to overcome that level. And then the level is going to increase. So often students talk about, or people talk about growth mindset, and they're worried that you're going to make things easier. And it's certainly not my goal. I want my classroom to be the most challenging that it can be, but I want the challenge to adapt to the students and support their success. My favorite quote about teaching is a teacher's job is to set students up for a series of successes. So one way to think about this is you have two ladders. One ladder has big spaces between the rungs, and it's really hard for some people to step all the way up to the next one, and they get to the top. Another ladder has small spaces between the rungs, and you get to the top of the ladder, but you get there easier, and it's easier for more people to do it because the ladder is better designed. I want my classroom to people to walk into my class and expect a challenge. What's the thing that's going to be hard or challenging today? They're going to expect the support. They're going to expect that they're going to learn something they didn't learn yet, so they can solve the problem they couldn't solve when they walked in. And they're going to be motivated and engaged in class because that's what it looks like. So I also want everyone in college to know everything you're learning in college, other people already know how to do. If you're struggling in your math class, your math lab, your math tutors, your professor, somebody knows how to do it. Until you get to like graduate level, everything you're learning in college, other people already know how to do. So being smart is being smart enough to ask people for help. It's not extra credit to figure it out on your own. That's working harder, not working smarter. So when you're struggling, intelligent practice is going to other people and learning new strategies that makes your effort more rewarding. That's what being smart looks like. So this is the concept that we want to teach students. And how do we know it works? Well, we did a lot of research with students. And when we checked back with them, students who had been taught this in the English class, most frequently, they took it to math class. The students on their own transferred it to math class. In fact, we didn't believe transferability the first time we did it, but the first time we had 86% of the students reported transferring it in the last 2 weeks to another context. The second time it was 83%. So in the last 2 weeks, both times over 80% of the students took it from one context to another. And the most frequent place they took it was math, even though they were learning about it in their English class. So we think this is a really powerful thing because basically, as one of my student ambassadors said, you give people an inoculation. This was even before COVID. You give people an inoculation and it helps them prepare and respond to all their challenges with a growth mindset approach. So you can see that this student, if a little code here, this is intervention 6, question 2, class I, student number 10. So this student, after the 6th intervention, says the sessions that we've done together has changed my mindset by knowing I can learn how to do anything. For example, I thought that math was one of my weaknesses as a student, but when I apply intelligent practice, I notice able to do it as long as I practice. What's so exciting is this student learned that lesson that you just did on intelligent practice like 10 weeks before they wrote this. So it was now just part of their thinking, a part of their response. We're empowering students to change how they think and respond to challenge. And so this is a different student thinking about the plasticity. So they learned about neuroplasticity. And then reflecting, they said, these lessons have changed my mindset in a way that I'm now thinking about my approach to learning. I understand that failure, criticism, and challenge is all part of learning and growth. So when students internalize this, it changes their outcomes, it changes their belief and actually what they literally achieve, not just what they believe they can achieve, but how they go about it. Another exciting thing we saw was resource use went up. When we asked students to self-report in the beginning of the semester, how often they went to office hours, writing center, labs, et cetera, the numbers dramatically improved, sometimes more than doubling from the number of students who reported going to get those resources at the end. So we want students to be successful. And one of my favorite studies is by Farrington, and this was a University of Chicago school system. And they found that the most powerful interventions were actually mindset interventions. What I love about this graphic is it recognizes all the cultural and social factors that come to our students, that our students bring with them, right? All the things that are outside the classroom. And even with all those in mind, the disparate economic situations, racial and sexual and gender identities, and all these things, with all of those, academic mindsets were still proven to be the most influential. In education, we often measure academic performance, but we know that those are led by behaviors which come from skills and strategies and continuing and perseverance. And mindsets are the thing, the fulcrum that has the most impact on improving the way that students deal with those challenges, regardless of their background and experience. And so reminding us that growth mindset's the first one. It's the belief that you can change, rooted in neuroscience. then you need to have a safe space. Because if you're going to fail, if you're going to admit you didn't get 30 on the number game, you have to be in a safe space. You have to feel a valued and important member of the community. And you have to have a space where you think that you're going to expect the support when you need it. And then that sense of purpose, because when you have purpose, you have a commitment that helps you overcome short-term obstacles to perceive and pursue long-term goals. My favorite way to talk about this is I'm a runner, and my friend has my favorite t-shirt, and her t-shirt says, "My sport is your sport's punishment." Because think about it, in any sport you play, what do they do when you get in trouble? Go run laps. The runner's like, "Thank goodness, I finally get to run. That's what I wanted to do all day anyway." So the runner is not seen as punishment. And that's why purpose is so crucial. Because to the person like Alan in the beginning who likes math, math is not a punishment. He'll do math all day, all by himself, not even in school, because it's part of his purpose. But in our school, we spend too much time having students solve for X and not enough time asking why. Students are not encouraged to focus on their purpose. They're not encouraged to ask their own questions. Rather, they're encouraged to answer other people's. I always ask my students, have you ever been in a class where someone in class, not them, of course, but someone says, "Is this going to be on the test?" And they all say yes. And I say, I understand, that student's a good student. They've been in our system a long time. And what they're really saying, I think, is this isn't important to me. It's not going to help me. If you admit it's not important and you're not going to put on the test, I'm going to forget it right now. If you say it's important and you're going to put on the test, I'm going to forget it the day after the test, because it's not for me, it's for you. That's the system that we have put students through for a really long time. And the student who's asking that question has figured the system out. So even when we do something different in our class, we have to know they come with this long-standing tradition of what they've been asked to do and what school means. But when we get them to think for themselves about what school means, they can start approaching it differently and start learning for themselves, right? Back to that question of productive play, where kids learn for their own joy and amusement and entertainment and growth. So we often have young people who think about like this idea of purpose, and you ask them and they always see themselves at the top of the mountain. There's a really great research by William Damon, who's now got a bunch of work on purpose that I highly recommend. But really short story, I was chaperoning a group of middle school students at a college visit, because my area is very pro-college. So they took little 7th, 8th graders off to colleges to convince them to study hard. And so in the tour guide said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the first 2 or 3 people said things like famous. I'm like, that's not a thing. You can't be famous. You have to do something for which you get fame. The 5th student said astrophysicist. I went over and gave him a high five, and I bought him lunch when we got to the lunch place, because I was so excited that he had an actual goal. Because what Damon's research shows is students often see themselves at the top, but they don't see the work. They don't know the work and struggle that's necessary. So in his research, he followed, I think I'm doing this from memory, I should have looked it up again. I think he followed 13,000 people, for young people, for 7 years. And in that study, they found that 25% of the people were disengaged. They didn't have a long-term goal. They didn't care that they didn't have a long-term goal. They were fine with it. 25% were dreamers. So when you ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? They say a singer. I want to be a singer. And they're like, great. What have you done? Are you in choir? Are you taking voice lessons or anything? And no, they weren't doing anything. They had a dream, but no work. Dabblers had a dream, but maybe occasionally did things, right? They might take a choir one year, but not the next, something like that. 20% were purposeful. What was so powerful for me in this study is the thing of who was in a purposeful group wasn't about their parents' economics, their race, their gender, anything else, or parents' education. The single most unifying factor of the purposeful group was they had a mentor outside of their family. And those people had a long-term sustained commitment to a goal, and almost always that goal was bigger than themselves. But when you ask students how often they've been invited to do the work to think about that, it's almost never. So we need to create a space to help students focus on purpose. You love your subject. I'm assuming that's true, but I feel confident in that assumption. What we need to do is help your student understand how what you're providing, the work that you're doing in your class, is useful to them so they can discover a love and passion too. But we have to work at that, because often they come to, I have a required writing class. They have to be there. Why do they have to be there? I have to help them see the value of that so that they want it and it's not just performative. I have to help them discover their purpose. So I do an activity with my students and often in faculty workshops about the purpose of education, because we have this beautiful seal of education, which uses Aristotelian idea that an acorn has the potential to become a mighty and majestic oak tree, which is really pretty. It sounds like we're gonna take little kindergartners and help them step away from their beloved person who brought them and then welcome them in and say, come on, we have cookies. And then we nurture that tiny little kindergartner through their education until they bloom and become the mighty and majestic oak tree that towers over and lives for centuries and provides food and shelter and affects the weather. And I ask students if that sounds like their education, and they say, no, it does not. So I say, what about this? What about you're like a bucket? The teacher has a lot of information or water that they pour at you, and your job is to catch it. And if you're a good student, you catch it all. If you're a bad student, you're a leaky bucket and you don't catch it. As soon as that test's over, you dump it over and you catch the next one. And notice that the bucket never changes. It doesn't go from an acorn to a mighty and majestic oak tree. It just stays as a bucket, and you just have to hold it or not. And ask if that's what their education feels like. And they say, yes, absolutely. So then the task for them is to do an education sketch. What would their education look like if they could draw a sketch, not about the artwork, just about the ideas, the best version of themselves, the best version of education. And I gave you this assignment on page 5 if you wanted to look at it or use it in the future. And so then they come back to class, and now they've done, talking about Bloom's taxonomy, they did creation. Then they meet in a small group and they evaluate which of them is the best, not the prettiest, but the best idea about education. And then they share the one they pick with the whole class, and the class votes, and everyone in the group who gets the winner gets extra credit. So now we've done synthesis and evaluation. And we talk about, this is an assignment about synthesis and Bloom's taxonomy. And then we talk about what we can learn. And then that's about helping them say, well, now, if that's your goal, what are you doing how are you responsible for that? What choices did you make this week that helped you get closer to that goal? Because if you don't have a goal, if I'm driving and you say turn left and I turn left and I say, where are we going? You say, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to turn left. You can't judge any action unless you have a goal. But once you have a goal, you get to be in every class you go to. If you start asking better questions and figuring out how your education affects you as a student, then you get to decide if you're getting closer to the goal that you set for yourself. And that is really empowering for students. I'm going to share one with you. This was a drawing by a student. Now it's really, really beautiful. It's actually a painting I have hanging in my office. This student was an art student, so it's not fair. But in 2 days, she painted this. But it won from her class, not because it's pretty, but because of her explanation. So she shared that it's up on the top of the mountain because you go to the top of the mountain for wisdom. And she picked up on the tree, but she added the desk because you got to put in the work. So she drew the desk into it. And then she got the apple here because it helps to suck up and laugh at your teacher's jokes. And then we had done Allegory of the Cave by Socrates. So she's got the fire there, and she's got educare and ask and inquiry. But what's really, really powerful about this, you may not have noticed yet, is she said the branches don't exist for their own sake. The branches are there to provide the shade and the tree and the food and everything else. And so what you may not have noticed yet is the branches spell out the word knowledge. It's easiest if you start here at the E and the G and the D. So the word knowledge is in here in the branches because she said the reason you go to school and get your own knowledge and skills is not for yourself, but so that you could serve the community around you. That's a pretty good answer for the purpose of education, especially for 48 hours and be able to represent it. And so that's the kind of thing that I think we want to have our students do. So I have my students do work and they really write papers and they send them out and they do projects, because for me, the purpose of critical thinking and communication classes is so that we can understand a complex world and use our communication skills to begin to get people to act with us to improve that world. So that's the kind of assignment that my students are going to be doing. So the question for you is, how are you going to find those places to make the content of your course purposeful and meaningful to the students? Right. And I'm looking at the time and seeing that I'm behind and I have to jump ahead. I'm really grateful for the chance to talk with you. I do want to share one more really fun study. So this group led by Mangles, they took students, college students, and they put them on a test. They found out who has a growth mindset and who has a fixed mindset. The first thing I want to say about that is I think that's the old way to talk about it. I don't really like that way. Someone doesn't have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. It's contextual. The same person could respond in one scenario with a growth mindset approach, and to another scenario, they might have a fixed mindset approach, right? So we want to recognize that. But they took a survey and they found that people tend to be in the growth mindset or fixed mindset group. And then they had some of these students who were identified as growth or fixed already take a test. And while they took the test, they had them hooked up to an EEG machine so they could see what parts of their brain were firing during the test. So they gave them simple, like knowledge-based questions, like what's the capital of this country? And if they knew it, they would get it right. They would get a little pleasant bing, and a green screen would pop up, very pleasant. And they would watch what happened in their brain. And if they got it wrong, then they would get like and a red screen would pop up, and they would watch what would happen in their brain. And then they told them the right answer to every question they got wrong. They showed, here's the right answer. And they watched what happened in their brain. And then the students finished the test. They took off the headset, they walked outside. And when they got outside, they got surprised, there's a retest. So they got to see who learned more, the growth mindset group or the fixed mindset group, when all of them were told all the correct answers after they got it wrong. Of course, the growth mindset group did better, because I wouldn't tell you about it if it was a fixed side. So that's how research works. I only tell you stuff that helps me, right? Okay, but the growth mindset group did significantly outperform the fixed mindset. But what's so cool about this study is they began to answer why. Here's what happened, as far as they could see. If you were in a fixed mindset group and you got it wrong, your emotion of anger was triggered. The part of your brain that flashed and lit up was emotion, because you see education as performance-based. You want to look good. You want to show how much you know. It's performance-based. And then instead of learning the new thing when you were given the correct answer, you're just upset that you got it wrong. On the other hand, the growth mindset group has a learning-based motivation system. So when they got the opportunity to learn the new thing, they tried to learn it. The memory part of their brain lit up. Remember, neither group knew there was going to be a retest. They weren't trying to study for the next test. The learning group, the growth mindset group, just actively wanted to learn the right answer for the sake of learning the right answer, because that's the motivation when you have a growth mindset. It's not about performance, it's about growth and learning. And it changes the motivation, which changes the behavior. And then when we help students know how to do things better, we give them strategies to use when they have that motivation, so they know how as well as why, and they have a safe space to do it. We can literally change their response to challenge. So we did a survey at the end of the time, 50% of the students reported that they changed the way they responded to challenge, not just in the class, but in their everyday life. And we can see that the mindset of professors measurably affects the outcome of their students in a large study for STEM. And it actually made a dramatic decrease in the achievement and equity gap. Groups that have been minoritized by society actually improved at a higher rate than the overall improvement. And when they asked the students perceived that the faculty members' mindset affected how they prepared the class, graded the material. The students could tell the difference without knowing which teachers behaved in ways that had growth and fixed mindset. And the exciting thing is we can change these things. We can do better so our students can do better, right? So I'm trying to bring it to a close here with the time that I have left. Okay. If we want our students to all succeed and do better, what are we willing to change? And I want to give you a toolkit that might be really helpful. You probably have seen this idea of SMART goals before. It's not new, but it's interesting. So if you want to get better, like everyone wakes up in the morning, it's like, nobody says, today I want to get worse, right? That's not a thing people say. So you don't get better until you define what better means, what changes you're going to make, and assess if those are getting you closer to your goal. So a really helpful way to do that is called SMART goals. That means they are specific, exactly what is going to change that I can measure and tell, right? Not my students are going to do better. That's not a measurable goal, right? My students will be able to compose a complete essay that has at least several sources. Like those are things you could measure, right? Several isn't a good number though. Okay, achievable. It's not like you're going to suddenly make your student a PhD candidate in biology in your intro to bio class. What's a reasonable, achievable goal in the time frame you have? Is it relevant to the larger outcomes and goals of the class? And then this is crucial. Often in education, we look at the end of the semester, right? And then we say, well, that didn't go as well as I wanted. I wish I could fix it. instead of saying, what did we do this week, this 2-week section, did it get us closer to our goal? If not, what am I going to change the next week? So you want to set specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goals. What does that mean? Well, in one example, a math faculty member who had learned about growth mindset and believed in it said he wanted his students to do revision. If they got a problem wrong, going back and learning how to fix it is one of the best ideas. So he thought that was really good. So he just said, well, I'm going to offer it. And how many students did it? Very few. But he wanted all his students to do it. So he asked the students, what would it take for me to get you to revise? And the students all said, give us full credit. When we go back and do it, we want full credit. He's like, no, I'm not going to give you full credit. He said no, right? So he thought about other ideas and he tried. He said, what if I give you this? And then he said, well, next test, how many students did the revision? And then he said, well, what else could I do? And so all through the whole semester, he changed his behaviors to motivate his students to do the thing he wanted, which was learn and revise, right? And by the end of the semester, 80% of the students were doing revision because he changed what he was doing to get them to do what he thought would be beneficial for them. Now, this was presented at a Carnegie Mellon conference. And so people raised their hands, so what did he do? And they're like, no, we're not telling you what he did. The point is you're supposed to ask your students and decide what you're willing to do. And at no point did he ever give them full credit. But the point of the SMART goals is not to just say what everyone else did, because that might not work for you and your beliefs or your students. And I'm not asking you to compromise your beliefs. You should do what you believe is the best educational things, but invite your students to be in that belonging, that sense of community where they have input in what that might look like. I'm teaching 2 back-to-back classes right now, and they're not going exactly the same because right after midterms, I asked the class what was working and what isn't, and we changed things based on it. So my 2 classes are different at this point because the students reported different things were working for different groups. I'm not saying they're different in my philosophy, but I'm doing different things because I want them to believe that they are matter and that their voice counts. This is a screenshot of my daughter. I'm trying to bring this to a close for you guys, sorry. I'm sorry, my sister. This is my sister. She was born with cerebral palsy. And when she was born, they said she'd never be able to walk or talk. And as you can see from this brain scan of her adult brain, because she started having seizures and unrelated medical condition later, she's missing a third of her brain. And if this happened to you as an adult, you'd basically be in a coma. But because it happened to her young, and she got a lot of physical and mental therapy and a lot of struggle and hard work, that she's a very dedicated person, she owns her own home. She has 3 kids. She runs her own business. She's very intelligent. And if you get in an argument with her, she will probably win. Trust me, I have a lot of experience in this. Because of neuroplasticity, she was able to take all the things that are supposed to be in this part of her brain, and she uses other parts of her brain because that's how the brain works. That's why a stroke victim can recover and relearn skills that they didn't have, because your brain is amazingly plastic. It can learn new things. And so when someone says our students can't, we have to say they can't yet because we haven't done the things that they need. I just get emotional talking about our family. So I'm going to share with you some links to some videos. One of them is by Corey, who was a high school graduate, but at college, he was a drug addict and he thought he'd ruined his brain. And he was one of our student ambassadors. And one time at a panel, I never heard him say this. He said that a 30-minute growth mindset workshop session that I led actually convinced him that he could succeed. He went on to get a 4.0. He went on to graduate from Fullerton College, won our Student of the Year, went on again to Stanford and won a Jack Kent Cooke Scholarship. So it's truly amazing what these people can do when they believe and are supported. I'll share a video so you can watch that later. Last thing I'm going to say here is, remember in the beginning I told you about my son and you did the drawing. So my son in 7th grade was in a class, an art class, and I was gonna be that parent who goes in and said, like, you can't put my son in art class. He has physical, like a learning challenge. It's a terrible class. Like, no, Dad, I like the class. So what you're looking on the left here is his first day self-portrait. So this was Jack drawing himself on day 1. Now, what you need to know is that Jack got an F- in this class. I think the minus was excessive. I think the F would have covered it personally, but Jack admits he didn't do any homework. He never did a single homework assignment in this class. But what you're looking on the right is Jack's final exam. So he learned about perspective and shading and all these things. He didn't know how to draw in the beginning, just like maybe you didn't know how to draw in the beginning, but he learned. He got an F-. He never did any homework, but just going to class, he learned that much. And for the first time in as far as I can remember years, Jack was excited to show me his homework. You can see he crumpled it up and stuck it in his backpack. He still got things to work on, but Jack was excited to learn. I think that is what education is supposed to be. So I appreciate your time and I'm open to questions. I'm really grateful for the chance to share with you and I hope you have a great semester. Thank you very much.
So I think we're just leaving the last couple of minutes here. If you guys have any comments or questions, please feel free to, either type it in the chat or verbally share. Vincent, I'm sorry, I didn't see. You can go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. This is very, very helpful. And then I do think that as the department, we're in the process of trying to infuse FYE, which is first year experience, into a lot of our pathway courses. I do think that this should be one of the first things the students should learn and should know about and should internalize and should start cultivating right when they step into BMCC. And I for sure want this to be front and center in any of the FYE designated courses. And I do think that it will make sense for the FYE designated courses to pair that we provide supplemental instruction will be the SI leaders in all these classes, because that's sort of closing the loop, the seeking help from others or getting help from others. And you have someone who has been through this particular course and have been through the first year at BMCC can definitely provide that kind of support in these FYE courses. So thank you so much. And I feel inspired and I'm ready to do my work.
I'm so excited and grateful, and I'd love to keep the conversation going. We're building a first year experience guided pathways. I'm one of the campus co-directors of those two projects. And so we have 4 things we want to accomplish in our first year experience, which is developing a growth mindset, mindfulness practices, resource use, and helping students discover a purpose. So that's our 4-part goal for our FYE. We weren't able to get a course in the first round, but we've got a series of things we're building on that. So I'd love to speak with you about that. And then just to echo, that I think is one of the most important things, the student ambassador, student tutor, like the student peer-to-peer part has been really important and transformational. So, and another thing is often overlooked is how important it is to those people who become those tutors, right? I share with you 2 stories of the people who went on to Stanford and Jack Kent Cooke scholarships, partly because of their role as student ambassadors and what it did for them. So I hope that that's something that you were successful at.
Great. So again, I don't see any comments or questions, but again, feel free to send me any emails. I just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for coming. I think I started off by welcoming everyone, that we currently, as we go back to normal, right, we fall into this very liminal learning space with its unique set of challenges. And I find that, really integrating a lot of what we learn here about academic mindset is something that's so time sensitive. So thank you, Dr. Powers, for sharing the amazing personal stories. I really enjoy the activities and the handouts that you've shared with us today. And again, really do find that this academic mindset of growth mindset, belonging, and purpose is something that, again, we really can incorporate into our classrooms to change the way our students respond to challenges. And I think that that's very powerful. So thank you again. Thank you to you all, and enjoy this beautiful weekend.